سمو الشيوخ، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية بالتعريف عن نفسي. اسمي عمر سلطان العلماء، وزير الدولة للذكاء الاصطناعي، ويشرفني اليوم أن أتولى مهمة إدارة هذه الجلسة في هذا المجلس الكريم. الحضور الكرام، عنوان المحاضرة اليوم هو مستقبل الوظائف في عصر الذكاء الاصطناعي، مع الدكتور أندرو مكافي الذي يحدثنا عن المتغيرات والمستجدات في العالم اليوم مع التقدم التكنولوجي ودور الذكاء الاصطناعي في حياتنا. دولة الإمارات هي أول دولة في العالم تطلق استراتيجية للذكاء الاصطناعي، وقيادتنا الرشيدة حفظهم الله هم أول قادة في العالم استحدثوا منصب لوزير دولة للذكاء الاصطناعي في الحكومة. هذا وإن دل على شيء، دل على أن دولة الإمارات لا تؤمن بمواكبة المتغيرات، بل تؤمن باستشرافها وخلق مستقبل أفضل لنا جميعا. واسمحوا لي الآن أن أكمل حديثي باللغة الإنجليزية. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker in today's session, Dr. Andrew McAfee, co-founder and co-director of the Initiative on Digital Economy and a principal research scientist at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Today's lecture is titled The Future of Jobs in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And what better place is there to discuss this topic than in the United Arab Emirates, the first country in the world to launch a federal strategy for artificial intelligence and the first country with a Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence in the planet. The UAE is not only focused on pioneering artificial intelligence internally, we are also focused on creating a better future enabled by this technology for all governments and citizens across the world, which can be seen in initiatives such as the Artificial Intelligence Governance Forum, which will be hosted in the United Arab Emirates in 10 days. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew McAfee.
Your Highnesses and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I am honored and flattered to be talking about the most interesting thing that I have ever seen in my career. And I think the most interesting thing, one of the most interesting things that is happening in the world today, which is the rethinking of how we should bring together minds and machines, given the amazing progress that we're seeing with technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So what I want to talk to you about today is this new world of bringing together minds and machines. And I want to start by talking about how we are using minds and machines together to do something that at first sounds kind of silly, kind of trivial, which is to play games. And the reason that we use computers and we use machines to play games is because games are very clearly defined and they have a clear result. We know who is better. We know if we're making progress because we win the game. So for as soon as we had computers, we invented computers in the early 1950s. As soon as we invented computers, we started using them to play games. And some progress was very rapid. As early as 1952, we had a computer that would never lose at tic-tac-toe anymore. But that's not really interesting. None of us in this room ever lose at tic-tac-toe. It's a very, very easy game. We started playing harder games, very difficult games with computers, and 40 years later, more than 40 years later, there was the next breakthrough, which was when Garry Kasparov, one of the great chess geniuses of all time, played an intense match against Deep Blue, an IBM supercomputer, in 1997, and Garry Kasparov lost that match. And for the very first time, the best chess player on the planet Earth was no longer a human being, it was a piece of technology. And since 1997, since that time, the difference between human ability in chess and digital ability in chess has only gotten bigger. And that gap now between computers and human beings in chess is now very big. That gap is now so big that a little while ago, someone asked a human chess grandmaster how he would prepare for a match against a computer. And he said, "I'd bring a hammer." So all of a sudden, chess became dominated by machines and minds weren't doing very much anymore. But there was another game where the situation was completely different. And it's an even older strategy game invented in China about 3,000 years ago called Go. And we started trying to use computers to play Go and to be good at Go. And we had failure after failure after failure. They were terrible at it. They were no good at playing Go, and they were not improving very quickly. And this is where we were just 4 years ago. In the year 2014, this was where we thought we were. There was this ancient game that the computers were terrible at, and they were going to continue to be terrible at it. And there are a few reasons why this is, why computers are so terrible at playing Go. The most fundamental reason is nobody on planet Earth can explain to a computer how to play Go at a high level. Now this sounds ridiculous, right? You would think, let's just go find the top 5 or 10 Go players on the planet, and we'll interview them about their strategies. How do you approach the game? Why did you make that move? And then we'll program a computer to do that same thing. That doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is if you go interview a top-level Go player and you say, okay, why did you make that move? What they say back to you in 100% honesty, what they say back to you is, I don't know. I can't explain my own reasoning. I've been playing this game for decades. My brain is good at this task. And out of some combination of my intuition and my experience and my intellect and my judgment and all these different things, the move occurs to me and I make that move. I can't explain why I make that move. The only reason we know that it's the right move, that it's a good move, is that I win the game. So this is incredibly frustrating for computer programmers. They don't have anything to work with because the top people can't identify their own knowledge, can't access their own knowledge, and can't explain it to anybody else. It turns out this is actually very, very common. In fact, it has a name, this phenomenon where we human beings, all of us, we know more than we can tell. It's called Polanyi's paradox. It was identified in the 1950s by a philosopher named Michael Polanyi, and it seems to place this very hard barrier on the kinds of tasks that we can give to machines. If no human being can explain how to do it, you can't give it to a machine. That job has to remain human. So that's where we thought we were, and we were not making very good progress against it. Here's where we thought we were in December of 2015. This is just 3 years ago. In the Wall Street Journal, here's a column again about Go, this ancient game where the computers are still not very good. That's December of 2015. Here's January of 2016, also in the Wall Street Journal. Oh, I guess the computers are really good at it now, 1 month later. And this column was about this paper, which was published in Nature, one of the most prestigious journals in all of science. This team built a machine learning system to play Go without being taught any human strategies. It learned from studying lots and lots of examples, completely on its own. And it got to the point where in a match against the European Go champion, it beat the European Go champion 5 games to nothing in a 5-game match. This was a big deal. We were not expecting this, but a couple people said, you know, that's interesting. However, the top player in Europe of the game of Go is only about the 600th best player on the planet, dominated by Asian players. So this is interesting, but you have not yet demonstrated complete digital superiority in the game of Go. And the team thought this was a good point, so then they challenged the absolute best player on the planet to play another match against this technology. They challenged a South Korean gentleman named Lee Sedol to another 5-game match to be played in March of 2016. And the right way to think about Lee Sedol is that he's like the Garry Kasparov, he's like the Michael Jordan, he's like the Lionel Messi of the game of Go. Just a talent that comes along maybe once a generation, a phenomenal talent. And in particular, it seemed like he would be very, very difficult for a computer to beat because his style was unpredictable and very creative and very innovative. And he seemed like he would be the hardest person in the world for a computer to beat at the game of Go. So they sat down, he agreed to the match. They played a 5-game match in Seoul, Korea in March of 2016. And if you remember, when the technology played against the European Go champion, the result was 5-0 for technology. The result this time against the absolute world champion in Go was actually a little bit different. The result this time was 4-1 for technology. And the way this unfolded was really interesting. The AlphaGo technology won the first 3 games and therefore assured itself of victory in the match. Sadal came back and he won the 4th game. And then all the commentary was, did he finally figure out the flaws in this technology? Did he finally figure out what he needed to do to win? Only 1 game too late. So then game 5 in this match was fascinating because it would test out whether Sadal figured out the computer only 1 game too late. The computer came back and won the 5th game very easily. So there is no doubt anymore that the best player of Go on the planet Earth today is a piece of technology. The best player of chess, the best player of tic-tac-toe. In game after game after game, the minds are losing to the machines. And the question is, what does this mean outside the world of games? What does this mean for other work that we want to do in the economy? What does this mean for all of us who want to have a career, want to have a job, want to earn a living? Some of the indications are not positive. When they interviewed Sadal at the end of the match, he said, I felt powerless. My accumulated wisdom and knowledge in this competition was not enough. He, the top human being, felt powerless here. And it brings up the question, well, what about outside the world of games? What's happening in the other areas of our economy? What's happening in the rest of the world? Do we see examples of these machines doing useful work in new ways? And absolutely we do. We see example after example of the machines doing things that they could not do even just a couple years ago. A team at Microsoft a little while back introduced a very interesting result. They built a machine that could understand human speech better than professional human beings at it. There are people whose job it is to transcribe human speech. This technology was better than professionals at doing that. And speech is one of the most fundamental things about being a human being. We are built to understand each other like this, and now we have a technology that's better at it than we are. We have technologies now that are better even than expert, very highly trained human doctors at diagnosing disease. This was a recent result from Stanford, where this team built a technology that could diagnose a chest X-ray and find pneumonia better even than a professional human doctor. So we're seeing this spread out into fairly important areas. The last example I want to give of computers doing useful work comes from the world of managing a data center. The team that built the AlphaGo technology works at Google. And like we all know, Google manages lots of data centers. It's where all their servers are stored. It's a very important part of the job for Google. Data centers are critical, and they use a lot of energy. And the team that built the Go playing technology said to the data center management team at Google, hey, why don't you let us run one of your data centers? Give us control of one of your data centers, and we will let our technology take over the energy management of it. And somehow, they convinced Google to let them run this experiment, to give them control of the data center. And the story that I've heard is when they finally satisfied everybody that they weren't going to blow it up and it wasn't going to be a huge safety risk, the data center team said, look, we will let you run this experiment, but don't expect anything. We've been working on this problem for years. We have optimized the energy in this data center. We are the absolute best in the world at this. So go ahead and run your experiment with your artificial intelligence system, but don't expect anything really big to happen. This is what actually happened. This is a graph of the energy use inside the data center before, during, and after they turned over control to the technology. And on this graph, down is better. And you see very clearly that as soon as they turned over management to the technology, as soon as they gave control to the machine learning system, the efficiency of the data center improved not just a little bit, but a lot. The overall energy efficiency improved by 15%, 15%, and the total amount of money spent on cooling, data centers get extremely hot, you have to cool them down, the total amount of money spent on cooling decreased by 40%, 40%. You see also, as soon as they turned control back over to the previous method, to the human beings, performance deteriorated, went back to its previous level. This is a very, very clean experiment. And what it shows is even in these areas that are economically very, very important, there's a lot of money at stake here. So you spend a lot of money and time building up expertise about how to do this difficult task. Even in areas like this, as soon as you give control over it to a properly designed technology, you see this kind of improvement happening almost immediately. And we're going to see opportunities like this over and over and over again in the economy. So it brings up kind of a fundamental question. If the world is heading in this direction, if all these examples that I'm giving show us the trend of the future, what do we still need human minds for? Where do we all come in this world of extraordinarily powerful technologies? It's a really important question, especially because one thing that we've learned over the past half a century of research about our brains is that our brains are pretty amazing, but they have all these problems associated with them. If you go to Wikipedia, one of my favorite articles to read is their list of all of the cognitive biases that we human beings have, all of the bugs in our software, all of the glitches, the failures, the things that our brains do wrong over and over again. There's a list of these biases on Wikipedia. There are about 175 entries on that list, 175 different things that prevent our brain from working perfectly. In fact, that list is so long that they had to turn it into a picture. So this is one of my favorite pictures in all of Wikipedia, trying to take these 175 problems in our brain and arrange them in some way that makes sense so that we can try to understand what's going on. So the problem seems pretty severe, right? We have these technologies that can do extraordinary things. They're getting better every day. They're getting better along an exponential trajectory, a trajectory like Moore's law. Meanwhile, the more we learn about our brains, the more skeptical we get about their ability to perform. So you can look at these two things in combination and say, wow, in the workforce of the future, in the economy of the future, we just don't have very much to offer anymore, do we? I think that's wrong. I think we human beings have a great deal to offer in the economy of the future, even as these machines are so incredibly powerful, because it turns out there are still very, very important things that we are good at that the machines are terrible at. And I don't see any indication that the machines are going to get a lot better. So what are these areas? Where are we still so much better than the machines? It is amazing how bad machines are at common sense. We human beings, even very, very small children, know how the world works, and all of our efforts to teach common sense to computers have been terrible failures. My favorite recent example of that happened to the company Uber, the ride-sharing company. Late in 2016, in the Australian city of Sydney, there was a terrorist attack in the downtown area. So like you can imagine, all the people in the downtown area wanted to leave. And so lots of people pulled out their phones and they tried to get an Uber to get out of downtown Sydney. Now, the way Uber's technology works, when you see a huge jump upward in demand, they raised prices automatically. This was the wrong thing to do during an attack downtown. And Uber got into all kinds of trouble for it, which they deserved. Now, no human being would have made that choice, but their algorithms were operating like they were programmed, and they said, okay, when demand goes up, raise the price, and Uber had to make a public apology because their systems just lacked that fundamental common sense about what's the right thing to do in this situation. So it's easy to undervalue our common sense. It's going to continue to be valuable over and over. I think even more valuable is the ability that all of us have to figure out not how to answer a question, but how to ask a question. What's the next thing that we should work on? What's the next problem we should tackle? What's the next opportunity? How do we make progress out there in the world? When Pablo Picasso was shown computers for the first time in the early 1970s, he said something that I think is just amazingly intelligent and insightful. He said, they're useless. All they can do is give you answers. Now, I don't think computers are useless at all. Answers are valuable in the world. But Picasso's point was where we human beings really shine, where our advantage is in asking a question about the world. He was repeating something said just about 200 years earlier by Voltaire. This is another wonderful quote. Don't judge a person by their answers. Judge them by the questions they ask. And in the future that we're creating, our ability to ask a question, to figure out what to go work on next, is going to become more and more and more valuable. Computers also still have terrible, terrible social skills. And it turns out there's wonderful research on this, even more than mathematics and engineering skills. The skills that are becoming more valuable in the economy have to do with interpersonal, with social skills like motivation, negotiation, persuasion, coordination. These things that we call management and leadership, these are not becoming less valuable in a world full of computers. They're becoming much more valuable. The evidence is very clear on this. And the computers are not going to become leaders or coaches or managers anytime soon. So these abilities are critically important. And then finally, this is the area that I'm incredibly excited about. We are creating a new era. We're writing a new chapter in the history of how we human beings interact with technology to go get valuable work done. And one example we've seen of this already is in the tallest skyscraper in Shanghai, China, which you see there, this beautiful building in the Pudong neighborhood. It turns out the first draft of that building, the first complete version of it, was generated by a computer. And it was generated to survive all of the earthquakes that could happen, all of the hurricanes and tornadoes, to stand up under weather, to have the right properties, to be energy efficient. All of that came out of the computer immediately. And then what the human architects and designers did is say, you know what? The building would look better if it did this instead of that. We want to have a little bit more room here. And they took that initial version from the computer and they improved it and they iterated on it. But what I love about this example is that the first version of this building did not come from a person sitting in front of a piece of paper and drawing things out. The first version came from a computer, and it was a very, very advanced version, and then we human beings got to improve on that and do what we do best. So given that, the last thing that I want to talk about is where the frontier is. Where is the cutting edge of how we people are going to be interacting with technology in the future? And I'm going to go back to games, because what we're learning from games is fundamentally really interesting. We were not expecting it. Nobody that I talked to was expecting this. And I think it shows us a lot about the future. So to explain what I'm talking about, I want to go back to the ancient strategy game of Go and talk about the most interesting thing that happened during that match between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol. And to do that, we have to do a little bit of beginning Go strategy. So if any of us here want to learn the game of Go, it's like chess, and one of the things you learn are the smart opening moves, the smart initial moves in the game of Go. And you'll go to a textbook, and you will see lots of diagrams like this. This diagram shows you the smart opening moves in the game of Go. And to repeat myself, we human beings created Go. We have been studying it for 3,000 years. We have built up a huge amount of knowledge about how to play this game, and that knowledge says this is how you start playing Go. And you'll notice something really interesting. All of these stones are either on the 1, 2, 3, the third row in, or they're on the 1, 2, 3, fourth row in. And to oversimplify a little bit, if you put your early stones on the third row in, what you're signaling is I want to play for the edge of the board. I think I'm better than you around the edges. That's where I want this game to happen. If you make your early stones on the fourth row in, what you're signaling is I want to play for that big open middle part of the board. I'm more comfortable there. I think I can beat you there. And that's where I want the game to play. If you make any other move early in the game of Go, what you're signaling is I am not a very good Go player. And your teacher will slap your wrist and you'll go back and you'll study the textbook some more because this is how you open the game of Go. The reason I tell you that is I want to show you the crazy thing that happened in the second game of the match between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol that nobody was expecting. You can go find on the internet, you can go find screenshots of what happened on the 37th move of the second game because it was so crazy. This is what happened. And it's not immediately obvious, so I need to focus in on it. In this game, AlphaGo, the technology, is playing black. And in the 37th move, which is still pretty early in the game, it does this. It makes this move on the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth row in the middle of nowhere on the board. And if you go watch on the internet, you can go find people trying to understand this and comment about it, and nobody has any idea why. They think there's a problem, there's a bug in the computer, and it makes this nonsensical move because 3,000 years of studying this game says, don't do that. Like we know, the technology went on and won that game, and what we think we're learning is that AlphaGo is able to see enough possible futures in this game that it would make that bet right there and believe that sometime by the end of the game, that move, which makes no sense, that move would actually turn out to be very, very valuable, which is exactly what happened. So the impression that I'm getting is that there are these areas where we human beings would like to perform well. We've been studying them for a long time, and our accumulated knowledge has brought us up to here. I think over and over again, the technologies are going to show us there's a lot more room to improve, there's a lot more room to get better. One last example, one of the Chinese champions that played against AlphaGo made this quote at the end of the match. He said, I don't think a single human being has touched the edge of truth in the game of Go. 3,000 years, not touched the edge of truth yet. One last example. The same team that built AlphaGo built another technology that would teach itself to play a game, not be shown any examples from human beings, teach itself to play a game entirely from nothing, from the ground up. And in a matter of hours, from nothing, from no knowledge, in a matter of hours, this technology got to the point where it had reached superhuman performance in both Go and chess. That's pretty amazing. To me, the crazy thing, though, is when experts analyze the chess moves that it makes. And again, the Arab world introduced chess to the Western world about 1,000 years ago. So in Europe and North America, we've been playing chess for 1,000 years. And we appear to be in that same situation where our knowledge has got us to here, and we're learning how much room there is. A computer scientist who studied this technology said, I think the main reason that it won was that it was not limited by human knowledge. It had not learned from us, it was not constrained by us, and when it goes off completely on its own, it reaches much higher levels of performance. One of the programmers, one of the people that built this system, who's a very good chess player himself, said, it doesn't play like a human being. And it doesn't play like our traditional chess programs. It plays in this third way. It plays like it comes from another dimension or another planet or another galaxy. And so what I get really excited about is the possibility that we have these machines that are a categorically different kind of intelligence that will look at the world differently than we do, and we can go explore it together. So I think one path forward for technology is that the machines are going to open up new territory, and then in partnership, our minds and our machines are going to go explore that new territory together. This is an entirely new way of learning about the world. I'm extraordinarily excited about it, and I think it's going to enable us to make very fast progress on some of the toughest challenges that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Makafi, on that. I have a few questions of my own, and we'll wait for questions from the audience if they have any. My first question is, games have very set rules.
Yeah.
They're very easy to define, and you can actually give the commands to a computer, or at least give him the end goal. Life isn't. Life is very complex. There are many variables that change. What is the difference in your point of view?
I think you're exactly right. And when I talk to my friends who do this for a living, who build these systems, you and I know some of the same people, one thing they tell me over and over again is don't get too excited about the games. There's a lot of work ahead of us because games are so tightly defined. To take the things that we learn from games and then go out there into the real world, which is messy, which doesn't play by one set of rules, which changes all the time. So we need to be cautious, but we should still be optimistic. For example, the story about managing the data center. That was a real-world example in a messy real-world environment where we still saw 15% improvement almost immediately after giving it to the technology. So we shouldn't get overly excited about the games. I think we should still get pretty excited about what the games are telling us.
Great. My other question is, artificial intelligence has been present for more than 50 years. Why are we seeing this huge surge right now, like from the last 10 or 15 years?
It's such a great question, and we asked that for our most recent book. We asked that question over and over and over. And what I was expecting to hear was somebody would say, oh, wow, 6 years ago, there was this one paper that was published that was this amazing breakthrough. We all read that paper, and then we went out and we put that to work, and that's why we have all that progress now. Nobody said that to us. In fact, what they said was that the fundamental breakthroughs, the insights, are 10, 20, 40 years old in some cases. So then I said, okay, well then why are we seeing all this progress just in the past 5 years? And the answer that we heard over and over was we needed much more powerful computers, we needed much, much more data, and we needed more eyeballs, more people looking at these problems. And what we kept on hearing was we have all three of these things now. We have astonishingly powerful computers, we have lots and lots of data, and because we're democratizing the knowledge, we have lots of different people who can help us with the problems. So we're making progress in all these different areas at once. That's the explanation I heard for why all this progress is happening now.
And how big of a factor is the improvement of the GPU, for example, in the evolution of artificial intelligence?
So one of the craziest things that we learned is someone figured out, less than 10 years ago, somebody figured out that the chips that we have in Xboxes and gaming consoles that your kids play with, these are perfectly designed for these kinds of applications. So they were called graphical processing units, or GPUs. And all of the innovators in artificial intelligence said, wait a minute, that's exactly what we need. So they started grabbing these chips, modifying them, making them even more suited. So there's a huge active area of research about designing chips from the ground up based on these GPUs to be exactly what we need for machine learning. So there's innovation with the hardware, with the software, with the algorithms. There's all kinds of innovation happening in parallel.
So I have one question from the UAE Space Agency, which asks, how can we use artificial intelligence in space, for example, as it expands? How will it help us dominate that frontier?
Any situation right now where you have what we call a lot of training data, or you have something that you're interested in. Is this a picture of a tree or not? And you have a lot of examples. Here's an example. This is a tree, this is a tree, this is not a tree, this is not a tree. So mappings between what you're interested in and all kinds of other data out there. Anytime you have that amount of data, you can make progress. This is exactly what machine learning systems are good at. So for example, in space, you might be interested in processing satellite imagery. So all you need are lots of examples of satellite images labeled with what you think is interesting in them, and then you can say, go find more examples of that, and the algorithm will come back and bring you back examples of it.
Perfect. The second question we have is on human resources. How can you use artificial intelligence to train people better, to get them ready for this new future?
Yeah, this is a fundamental question, because one thing that I've heard, my friends who are doctors are worried that even though these technologies are amazing, they won't help us train doctors, because the way you learn as a doctor is by seeing lots and lots and lots of examples. If the machines are doing all of the diagnosis, how is the person going to get that training? It's a very profound question. I think the right way to make progress is, again, to have that person working side by side with the machine and to look at all the same examples the machine looks at. And every time the person makes a diagnosis and the machine disagrees, and it turns out the machine is correct, the person needs to learn and to get feedback and to realize why their diagnosis was incorrect. So training professionals is a great example of where we need to have people working side by side with machines and getting very quick feedback about you made a good decision or a bad decision. You made a good diagnosis or a bad diagnosis. So we can train people better, but we have to change the approach.
So in a nutshell, actually understanding how the machine thinks and operates is similar to training people to use a computer, for example, 30 years ago. We need to be enabled by this technology rather than disregarded by it.
If you disregard this, I can assure you, as an individual, as a company, as a country, if you disregard this, you will eventually get left behind. The closest analogy that I have is electrical power, which changed the world a century ago. If you stuck with the old technology, if you stayed with steam power, you just became irrelevant. What's happening now with these new technologies is as powerful as electric power. You can either do what the UAE is doing and your job is doing, which is to try to understand this and embrace it, or you can get left behind. I don't think there's a third option.
I have another question from the audience, which is how can we use artificial intelligence to increase human intelligence? So how can we get better than the machine?
This is a great question. And the reason I'm optimistic about this, I mentioned Lee Sedol, this Korean gentleman who is an amazing Go player. Before he played against AlphaGo, Lee Sedol was winning about 75% of his matches against other top-level human beings. After he played against AlphaGo, he was winning about 95% of his matches against other human beings. So these technologies are great ways for us to become more intelligent ourselves. And when you look at top-level games like Go and chess, everybody uses a computer now. It's the way that they can get smarter more quickly in their domain. So engineers, doctors, lawyers, we're all going to be using these technologies more intensely, and they're going to make us smarter, not dumber.
So is the definition of artificial intelligence changing over time? If you looked at, for example, a calculator 50 or 100 years ago, that would have been seen as intelligence because it can compute so many numbers in such a quick amount of time. Do you think it will evolve as time passes?
Yes, absolutely. So someone said artificial intelligence is what the computers can't do yet. So that definition is changing all the time. We're going to look back in our lifetimes. We're going to look back and think that it was crazy that we ever had human beings making the first attempt to diagnose disease. That's going to seem like we were barbarians. And that, of course, the right thing you do is let the technology, let all the evidence take the lead, involve human beings appropriately, but we're going to look back on a lot of things that we're doing today and think, what were they thinking back in 2018? Were they crazy?
So if you can give us a prediction of a job that does not exist today, but will exist using artificial intelligence, what would it be?
Health coach. So right now, when I have a problem and I go to the doctor, my doctor diagnoses me and he tells me what to go do, and then, sometimes I go do it And sometimes I don't, we should be honest. What's going to happen in the future is that diagnosis will be done with much more technology, but then there'll be a human being involved to check with me and say, are you exercising? Are you eating correctly? Did you take your medication? Are you looking after your health? Right now, family members do that for us, and they do a good job, but they can do a better job. We should have professionals, not so much for the diagnosis, and more for the caring for human beings over time.
So the EQ side of things, not the IQ.
Absolutely, the emotional quotient as opposed to the intellectual quotient. The IQ is still valuable. I think it's less valuable, still some, but less valuable in the world of tomorrow. The EQ, the interpersonal skills, are going to become much more valuable.
Perfect. I have one last question. Do you think that artificial intelligence has a negative aspect, especially when the machines will take decisions, for example, to go to war rather than make peace?
I'm very worried, and I'm sure you're worried, and people in the room are worried about what happens when the bad guys get very, very powerful technologies. So the good news is that we are democratizing access to extremely powerful technologies. The bad news is that we are democratizing access to extremely powerful technologies. And we can think about cyber warfare, we can think about cybersecurity. These are already difficult, they're going to get more difficult. And even if we say in the United States and we say in the UAE that we will not build lethal autonomous weapons, will everybody else on the planet agree to that or not? Probably not. And then what does the future, this is terrifying to think about, but the future of warfare becomes a very, very scary place. So again, we have to be aware of these challenges, we have to face them and start thinking about them right now while we still have time to make smart decisions here. I think I'm in the same position you are. You and I are both optimists, but we have to be careful and cautious optimists because the world is changing so quickly and the tools are getting so much more powerful.
Thank you very much for concluding. Thank you for being here and for the insights that you shared. أشكركم الحضور على وجودكم معنا اليوم ونشكر صاحب المجلس على توفير هذه الجلسة المميزة. شكرا.
Thank you all.